All right, Bernie, to get our day started, thought it'd be funny if we talked about beer since we're both having one right now at the moment. So, cheers to you, my friend, and let's talk about some beer.
Thanks for the invite, Zach. You
Anytime.
didn't invite me. If you didn't invite me, I would still be sitting here drinking the beer by myself.
Well, now we're having one together. All right, Bernie.
Did you receive the photos I sent you today?
I don't know if I got any today. I did get the copies of the Contian flag story, but that's all I got so far.
Okay, well, I sent some pictures
Let me.
of Contian and some pictures of 2.5 and 1.5. I'll have to make sure that they got to you. I'm having a heck of a time with my printer and a heck of a time with my computer. I'm down to the point where somebody says, "Well, why don't you have a e-pad?" And I go, "What the hell's that?" I'm still trying to get separated. I had to go dig to get my printer to work. I had to go dig out the. I had to go dig out. Wait a minute, here they are again. They're pretty insistent about this. That's why I pay extra.
Well, tell me about some beers that you had in Vietnam. What was your opinion on Vietnamese beer?
Well, good beer came into uh, Consonute and that area down there, which and help me out here. What am I thinking of? Three Math was the main importation camp. Uh, anyway, sorry, don't mind me. But anyway, the beers we got out in the field. There was a definite some U.S. soldiers and airmen had these passes that allowed them to buy up to 12 cases a month or 10 cases a month, whatever. Of course not. Why would you give the Marines an opportunity to have beer in their backpack? So basically what happened was we got the stuff that was left over. Carling Black Label, Ballantine, and San Miguel. Now, of all those three, San Miguel was the best because it came from the Philippines, which means that, yeah, but the two that came from Carling Black Label, Ballantine, were they proved this later by investigations of the support to the Vietnamese services, was that those cans were brewed green, put on board these old Liberty ships, and shipped over to us with the idea that they would mature or cook long enough. By the time we got them, they'd be done. They were not. They were not. So, I mean, you get a Carling Black Label and you go, "Oh shit, this is going to hurt in the morning," you know. But Carling Black Label and the one that we preferred out in the Ville and would actually stop every now and then, get off a ride wherever we were and go to the Ville. And the ones that we really appreciated were Ba Mui Ba, which we called Tiger Piss, and the other one was the uh, Ba Mui Ba, and there was another local brew, which we Black Panther, you know, and so they were they were good. And a lot of times you'd go out in the Ville and come up with the money, and they'd sell you Da Bui there, which was good stuff. And every now and then they'd have a couple cases of Coca-Cola and a couple cases of Ballantine. And we always figured there was some kind of internet that was going on between them having Carling Black Label and selling it back to us. But that was because we were Marines. We couldn't have our own, I somewhere, Zach, I'd have to dig through my stuff, but I have a card that shows me as being part of the 3MAF uh, organization, being a 3MAF remembrance, and that in that uh, in that 3MAF book, it showed me how many cartons of cigarettes I could buy every week, showed me or every month. It showed me how much beer I could buy every month. Well, the Marine Corps decided not to give the rest of us these ration books because they thought there was a great propensity for abuse. And they were probably right. One time, I'll tell you a short story, I hope. One time, my good buddy uh, came back. We came back. We're coming out of the field, and we've been out there for 10, 12 days. We look pretty rugged. The clothes are tore up. We're still covered with mud. We're just coming off an operation. And we get to, we get down to the PX, and we don't look that good. But Gordon Fowler, who later became Chili King and then later became the great artist that he is. So Gordon says, "Hey," he said, "we got to get some beer." And I said, "Yeah, but they won't sell it to us. The PX wouldn't sell it to us." He said, "Watch this." And we waited, and suddenly a Jeep pulled up with an Air Force two-striper. And we walked over to him and said, "Have you got an allotment for beer?" Guy says, "Yeah." "Have you used any of it?" "Well, a little bit." "Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you so much money, greenbacks. We want you to go in and buy 2 cases of beer. And don't worry, if you should decide to take our money and screw us, Gordon here is a sniper, and we'll get you." We had that young Air Force man brought out 2 of the best cases of beer we had in years.
What kind of beers were they?
Well, they were, first of all, if you could ever get anything, it was a Budweiser. It was top of the line, trading the stock. The other one was San Miguel, which came out of the Philippines. That was a good beer. Unfortunately, it was only in bottles, so you had a hard time justling 12 bottles back from the club on your way to the bunk. When anyway, that was the other thing you had to watch out for, particularly when we got up north, was you got out to the what we call the stand. I don't want to use the term, but anyway, we would go out to the Ville, and we'd come across some of these vendors that were selling Silver Fox is the one I remember. It was supposedly a Korean whiskey, but they had Four Roses and all these other things. And the first thing you did was you very carefully searched it to see if there was in fact anybody had cut the label, or not the label, but if they cut the wrapping around the neck. And of course, you had a couple of people that said, "I can tell when they've." What they would do is they would take that and cut it with cheap rice wine, and you're still paying, Four Roses premium, and you take it back and you drink it down, and of course you got a tremendous unofficial. You can't work the next day, but we used to go to the Bill and try to find out if we can buy from somebody that hasn't cut it, which meant you had to inspect the neck really close. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
Now, what other things could you find in the Villes outside of beers and liquors?
Well, they had wonderful bread. To this day, I would love to have some of that rice flour bread, which they carried in a gunny sack. And that was fantastic bread, particularly when you've been living on sea rations. And people would dip it into the beans and barbecue sauce just to get some taste out of it. But the most thing that we would buy would be basically some of the ingredients they had for uh, they would have a bunch of spices, and you didn't know what the hell the spice was, but they had little red peppers, and you could buy some of these little red peppers to break up your sea rations. So I can remember one time I bought some little red peppers, and the guy assured me that they were very mild, very mild. And needless to say, I spent 2 days with a burning sensation all through my body. And never again did I buy small peppers.
Oh gosh. Um, I know I know a good feeling of that. A friend of mine and I, we did some hot sauce once thinking that we were gonna try the hottest stuff, and it didn't work out so well. It was a very miserable feeling.
Yeah.
But
Let me just conclude by saying it burned always.
oh, I can't imagine, but I mean,
Yeah. The other thing is, since you asked about food, was not so much south of Da Nang, but when we got up north into Quang Tri in that area there, we patrolled villages, and they would have a big kettle going of soup, and we would always try to buy some soup from them just because it was a break from sea rations. And so we would go in occasionally into the ville, and we'd find a cook pot, and they're cooking, and we'd say, how much, how much? And they'd say, two piasters or whatever they were using at that time, 3 piasters. And they give you a ladle. So you could pull it out and put it in your canteen cup. And the thing about that was you learned early on, this is another new guy lesson. And that was, you don't dig to the bottom of the pot. You don't want to know what's in the bottom of the pot. So just if they give you a ladle, don't take it from the bottom, take it from the top. The reason is, did you see those monkeys? No. Well, I wonder why.
now I know you went to Way City before Tet Offensive. Did you find any food bars in Way City?
Oh, now you're asking for my moment of R&R.
Yes, sir.
City, when I got there in 1967, was still considered an open city, to the extent that the Air Force actually ran weekend bus tours up there to view uh, the ancient city and all the treasures that there were in Way City. And so, I mean, that was in May of '67. Uh, by the time I got there into Way, of course, early on, which would have been about October, November, when I came down out of Contien for a short rest, I went to see my friend Tom. Uh, Tom was there as an AFVN. Tom Young, sergeant, young man from uh, Little Rock, Arkansas. Wife with one daughter. We connected back in El Toro, where we all seemed to connect at one time before we got shipped over. And so Tom was at the AFVN station. And I got the word that he was saying, anybody coming through VFM, come over and see us. And so I went over and saw Tom. I said, Tom, I understand you got an extra bunk. He said, yeah. He said, and what's more is we'll go down this evening, down along the river where the university students hang out. He said, it's a nice place to have a wine and some food. So we'll live like real people. And I said, that'd be great. Next morning, I slept on sheets that night because they had a spare bedroom over by the AFVN TV station. And the next morning, I got up and I said, I got to catch a 6 by going back up to Dong Ha. And he said, well, I'll see you later in the month. And I said, okay, I'll be there. Well, the end result is Tom was among the AFVN staff that was overrun by the North Vietnamese in their first day. In other words, they had the radio station, and then they had a house where they all lived and took care of themselves, and they had a place to live. But the AFVN station was surrounded at that time by NVA because it was a broadcasting circumstance. And I was pushing with Hotel 25, and we were pushing our way towards the railway station. And one street that went off was one that took us to the AFVN radio station, and I knew where it was. And so we went down there, and I have pictures. I can certainly send them to you. Pictures of what was left of the house after they've been hit with mortars and shoulder fired weapons and everything. Part of it was burned, and we could tell that there had been a horrendous fight. But we found out in the back, out of the back of the house, there was an Air Force sergeant who tried to make a run for it, and his body was still laying in the rice paddy. And I went and looked for Tom, but I couldn't find Tom. So then we finally, the rest of Echo 25, not, what, yeah, right. It was Captain Christmas Company came down towards the radio station because it had been identified as an area we needed to take possession of. And I went along with them. Unfortunately, we got there, I couldn't find Tom. And a little later on, somebody not too far from the radio station said, we got a grave over here. And so I went over, and it was Tom. He had a major soldier. You could tell by the bandaging, he'd been wounded in the shoulder, but he was wounded. And so the thing they did was they just shot him and put him in the ditch and covered him with some dirt. And the reason for that was they didn't take prisoners that were wounded because they didn't have the capacity to take care of them. Now at that same station, at that same AFVN station, there were two other guys, two other people. One was James DiMardo, James DiMardo, who had been appointed as a second lieutenant. He was in charge of the radio station. He and another corporal, Marine corporal by the name of John Deering from Tennessee, were captured. And they actually marched them all the way up to Hanoi. They took them out of Hue and marched them for several weeks up to Hanoi, where DiBernardo was put in to try and make propaganda films. The first thing they did was break your glasses, realizing that it's true. And so they just basically would break people's glasses. They broke our glasses, and he said that basically what happens with Deering, he had to hold on to Deering's shoulder going up the trails for the next 5 weeks or however long it took him. Anyway, I had the unpleasant experience. And it's interesting because I sent you the picture of the Hotel 25 green truck. And that's what we put Tom on. But yeah, he was wounded, and we realized that those particular NVA believed if you were wounded, you were a liability instead of an asset, so they took you. Anyway, somewhere out there is Tom's widow and Tom's daughter. I've never been able to contact them. They never contacted me.
It's a very tragic story. I mean, it's sad.
Yeah. We had a great bottle of wine sitting down on the river looking at all the college girls. And it was kind of an in-country R&R. We thought this could never last, but we tried it again.
Now, at that time too, I mean, when you were there before Tet, Hue City was a beautiful city, if I'm not mistaken.
What?
Just flourishing.
I have a photo I'll send you. Yeah, it was a beautiful place. I mean, it had been declared a no-fire zone. I forget the terminology, but supposedly there was not supposed to be any combatant combatant incidences inside of the ancient imperial palace, which included all of the south bank of Hue City. I can explain that later. There were two battles for Hue City. First one was on the commercial side, which was a commercial side running along the riverfront, hospital, nunnery, school, the provincial headquarters, all of that was on the south side. And so I forget where I was going with this. But anyway, the end result was we knew that there were two different battles going to be fought. Uh, I'm sorry, Zach. You have to bleep that one out. I'm confused.
Okay,
I don't
Steve, no
remember your
worries.
question.
Um, well, it's leads into talking about just the beauty of Way City, and you talk about the two different battles for Old Way, the Citadel, and of course the South Side with the urbanized new area.
Two different battles with two different units with two different learning experiences. That's how I would sum it up.
Well, and I think that's what makes Way City unique, is how it was fought by two different units, 1-5 and 2-5, and how the rules changed. And in many ways as well, the restrictions placed on you guys by the Vietnamese government and the Marine Corps.
Oh, yeah. The first 10 days we were there, we weren't allowed to have anything more than 60 millimeter mortars and RPGs and small arms. And we kept saying, why won't they bring in the artillery? Why won't? Because the South Vietnamese, whatever, whatever they were right or wrong, I don't know at this point. But they decided initially to hold off on heavy weapons because they wanted to preserve the sanctuary of the imperial palace. But it cost us lives. Eventually, I don't remember, sometime around February 10th, maybe, the decision was made by the South Vietnamese brass and the American brass and said, well, no, we're going to have to open this city up. We got to go across the river and we got to go into the Imperial Palace area because otherwise we can't win.
Well, and a lot of people do not know this, but in the Imperial Palace sector of the city, there was a ARVN division, ARVN unit, I think, maybe not a division, but a regiment at least, holding out, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. I should like to direct you to Harry Way, who was a leader, captain of what was called um, he was called the Habak, Bacau. They were the best of the best that the South Vietnamese had, and most of the ones that he or operated with were from Way City, including himself. That's why the name was Harry Tran. Uh, the end result was that a lot of those people in the tunnels, there were great tunnels. We kept trying to figure out, well, how in the world on the north side did they keep getting reinforced, new weapons, new men, new ammunition? We couldn't figure it out. Well, there was a whole series of tunnels underneath the old provincial headquarters or the old provincial palace. And so Harry Way and his South Vietnamese Hoc Bao, you can check that one out, spent most of their days at nights sitting in the tunnels waiting for the NBA to come so they could ambush them. But it was a very permeable, it wasn't what you call a tight perimeter. There were a lot of leaks in where these NBA were still getting through with supplies, ammunition, and everything. And it was, I have to give credit to the South Vietnamese Hoc Bao and Harry Way because they went into those tunnels at night and stopped them. Anyway, I've got a book on Harry Way I'll send to you that you may find interesting.
Thanks, Bernie. I appreciate that. Well, and before we get into some of the combat stories and leading, of course, to Way City, I know you'd sent me something a couple of weeks ago that I've had a question about, and I was going to pull it up for us if you don't mind.
No.
And so I don't know if you're able to see what I'm looking at here, but
Well, if you run across a Marine that spent any time in Vietnam, they're going to tell you that, yeah, I remember Sergeant Mike. Sergeant Mike was this talented. He was initially an 0141, which I believe was it was basically a Remington Raider type guy. But he had this talent for drawing, and he started drawing these things, and occasionally they'd make their way into the Sea Tiger. And he became so popular that the general of Third Mine said, this guy needs to be brought up here and let him start producing cartoons for our troops. And so it was kind of Willie and Joe in many ways. And it was hilarious humor. And even looking back on it this day, 67 plus years after that, it's still fun because it's all marine oriented. Like he says, he doesn't want just feel like much like a little green amphibious monster today. In other words, he doesn't feel like being a Marine. But yeah, I don't know how many other people have them, but I have the two books of Sergeant Mike and all the humor that goes with it. I would like to someday be able to put that somewhere.
Well, by
But
all means, send me all the Sergeant Mike you want. I mean, I really like the one on the right side here. One more
yeah,
tourist of April showers out of you, and you can hang it up.
yeah. There's another great one. I'll have to look for it. It's about correspondence, and that one of them saying, I don't believe that there's any kind of enemy out here, and the other one saying, why do you think I'm carrying you? But yeah, it's a great. If you like, I'll send them to you, and you can copy whatever you want and send them back.
Absolutely, Bernie. By all means, I'd be more than happy to. But this is great. And
It
like,
was our Willie and Joe. I mean, it was something that kept the Marines going and looking forward to was finding another Sergeant Mike cartoon.
well, it's like you said in our last interview, you need humor, and even if it comes in the form of this.
Yeah, it was great humor.
Well,
Now, when I send you the books, you'll understand what I mean. Great humor. If you've been hanging around with enough Marines, you can appreciate the nomenclature.
well, and speaking of the nomenclature, what were some of the slang terms and phrases that you guys used in country? And you can be totally open here. You don't have to hide anything. By all means, let it rip.
You're asking for a bad situation. uh there were just like everyone, there were a lot of different people who had parameters on how to describe situations. You know, we there was a lot of uh descriptions of the enemy. Uh, but in my particular case, the group I hang out with or ran around with, we had just the basic conversation, which was Luke the Gook looks like he's coming tonight. The other one was the Boom Boom Shack down at the end of the road. I'm trying to clean this up as best I can. Yeah, and some of the others were, just basically Victor Charlie was the call sign, Victor Charlie, and the other one was they don't want to be here any more than we do. Those are the kind of things I remember. You kind of got me stopped thinking what ones I could come up with.
Well, um, of course, my humor with the Boom Boom Shack, I find that to be pretty self-explanatory.
I can send you a picture if you'd like a picture of the Boom Boom Shack with the
Absolutely.
with the South Vietnamese military police parked in front of it. I got one.
Oh man. Well, and that just leads into this lighthearted, humorous aspect. What are some of the more humorous things you remember about your time in country? Things that stand out?
Uh, yeah, okay. We're up north. We're patrolling in the Trace, just between the DMZ, and they were in the area where the Air Force had dropped a couple of 500-pound bombs. Now those really, really, really real estate change the real estate when you drop a 500 bomb in. It creates a very big hole, and torches all the trees around it, but it creates a very big hole. And so if you sit there during the monsoon season, like it was when we were there, what you end up with is end up with a lot of water and slime down the bottom of the at the bottom of the bomb blast. I mean, there's a pool of water, rainwater, but it's green and it looks horrible because it's been sitting there. And so I can remember it. I think it was a unit of a unit of the Third Marines, but we were combined digging in for the evening. And one of the things that somebody said, that really looks like a shithole. That really looks, there's nothing worse than falling into that water. Somebody says, yeah, it looks pretty bad. How much do you want to try it? Guy looks back around and says, well, I don't know. What do you got? The other one says, well, if you dive into that water and get all covered with the moss, I'll give you $5 US currency, which was a trading item. And so he just took off his web gear and slid down into the water, flashed around a little bit, and we had to throw a rope to get it back up. And he says, I want my $5. But that was one incident.
Did he get his $5?
Yeah. Oh yeah. They paid right up, You ever at the trading economy includes the top of the trading economy was US green dollars. I mean, those were number one. You could buy most everything with that. The piastres came in after that. And then we had this stuff that was called MPC, military MPC, military monetary. Uh, uh, anyway, there were these little coupons, 5 cents, 5, 10, 15, 20, $30 that we had that they would give to us that we could buy supposedly at the PX. And of course, all the Vietnamese stands outside the gate were taking MPC, military pay certificates, MPC. Somewhere, I think I still got one. But anyway, that was the local commerce was, if you can buy it, what do you got for greenback? I don't have any greenbacks. What do you got for MPC? Well, I'm going MPC. What you got for piastres? I got $10 in piastres. Ah, shit. I'll give you 5. It's just, it kind of had to explain to be there, but
Still, though, I mean, would the Vietnamese take American greenbacks too?
oh, they loved it. That was a black market item. That's why they were so insistent we didn't have any green dollars to go out among the population, was because that was black market. Well, hell, without black market, you wouldn't have got anything. So it was common to take green dollars wherever you could get them. Some guys I knew had a family send them to them so they'd have green dollars to go down the ville and buy stuff, because otherwise they were stuck with piastres and military payment certificates. So, there was green dollars were the best buy you could get. In other words, not to be brutal about it, but if you went to a boom boom house, green bucks bought you everything. That's true. I mean, you wanted everything. It was $5 greenback.
Got to do what you got to do, right, Bernie?
Every day is a challenge. You just try to get by it.
Yes, sir. Now, are there any other humorous incidents that come to your mind?
Well, I have to stop and think about that for a minute. There was a lot of humor, a lot of humor. But it was the kind of humor that comes and goes. It happened at the circumstances. What you don't remember is some of the humor that I remember was what you call gallows humor.
Yeah.
For instance, this is a story which I'm sure you can find someone to back it up. we were out on the trace, and I think I explained the trace before is that land before you get to the DMZ and before you're still out in Contien, you're patrolling all that area all the time. Well, one of the things about being out in the trace was we weren't allowed. No way in hell would anybody ever confess to it. But I can remember sitting out there at night in November, sitting on the trace with a radio man that had dialed in Hanoi Hana, Hanoi, Hanoi Hana. And now on his Frick 25, he had a channel where he could do with it because we were out in the open. I mean, there wasn't any jungle coverage or anything, so he could open. And we ended up listening to pop songs, some of the Sly and the Family Stones and some of the populars that were hits at that time. And then she'd come on and talk about, well, we discovered that the 327th Army Division will be coming into a meat grinder on Wednesday when they try to, we just listened to all that shit. But it was nice because she played regular new music. I mean, somebody was sending her the current pop tens over from wherever they were, sending it to her so she could put it on the radio. It wasn't the first time we heard it. We heard her down once in South Vietnam or South Da Nang. But yeah, Hanoi Hannah was our girl.
Well, what kind of music did you like to listen to at this time period, Bernie?
Oh, the Supremes, the Fleetwoods, Elvis, the CCR. It was popular. It was not old stuff. It was popular with what was going on back in the States.
Now, did Hanoi Hannah play better music than AFN radio?
Yeah. she played Puff the Magic Dragon, which you would never get on, Good Morning Vietnam. I need a 5-minute story.
Let it rip, Bernie.
Sometimes you need to sit down and think about things. I tell you another funny story. This one I wrote up. I think it got published in the Sea Dagger, but I still got the evidence that I wrote the initial story. The 3-math formula, sent it to them. Anyway, we're at Gontian, and it's I don't know, it's sometime around Christmas time, and I'm with my good friends, good buddies, John McDonnell, who was the radio man for 2nd Platoon, and Mac and I had been together since Da Nang, and Doc Turner, John D. Turner, Corman. Doc Turner and I had spent a lot of nights, standing radio watch, and he always knew he could count on me. And then Second Lieutenant, where Sudham, Second Lieutenant Sudham, he'd just taken over 2nd Platoon, and we were all up at Contien, which you've seen pictures. It's muddy, it's miserable, it's wet. There's nothing nice about the whole place. It's either dry and the dust is in your eye, or your boots are sunk in the ground. You can't walk. Anyway, the three of them decided to go down. They got cleared to take a shower. And again, I think I told you, showers were 50-gallon drums, maybe heated, but most of the time not. Just 50-gallon drums with some pallets that you walked on, and you could quickly soap up. And then after you finish soaping up, rinse off, and that was your shower. That Corman was always there to keep an eye on things. So they were sitting down there, the three of them, waiting their turn in the shower. And we started taking incoming rounds. And all of a sudden, they're exploding very close. And so Doc and John said, we got to get out of here. And Sudham, who had not been there that long, said, well, where do we go? And they said, we don't know where now we go. We've got to get out of here because this is wide open. Head for the bunker if you can get there. And so they were nude. They had nothing, no clothes, because they had their showers, their towels, but they lost those in the run to get back to the bunker. And Lee Sudham says, there's nothing embarrassing about being a new platoon officer and everybody seeing you run into the bunker stark naked. It was a great story.
Well, speaking of content and stories, I mean, you've got the one you sent me that I'm gonna pull up here for everybody is this flag story, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, I loved it. It was a great story.
So with this story you sent me here, Bernie,
Well, actually, I think there should be a copy of the hard one that came on the Sea Tiger too.
there is. I've got both, and so, but I'm
Okay,
gonna show this.
I understand where you're going, my friend. This is how we used to prepare our copy.
And so, what is it? What is this written on? Just regular parchment typed on?
Regular paper. I always would find out where the office, the 0141 clerks were, and because they always had typewriters. And so I could go in and use their typewriter type of stories. You notice this one says Informational Service Office Headquarters, 3rd Marine Division, FMF PMO. This was submitted and typed up and forwarded by the 3rd Marine Division, and I was with 1st Marine Division. So
That's
it just
what makes
shows
it
you.
interesting.
No, that's how you just basically the bottom line was you typed it out, you wrote it the best you could, you found somebody that was going to go somewhere back to Da Nang so you could send it. And of course, in this particular case, when we were out at the trace, and that's where this took place, was we were out in the trace, because 2-1 was still in the barrel. Basically it was I filed it through 3rd Division, 3rd Marine Division ISO office, which, should have supposedly been 1st Marine Division, but hell, I was up to 3rd Marine Division, so you file it where you can. And
Now,
it got published. It got published, as I recall.
and this one did get published. I know it's a pretty big thing in the Sea Tiger when I read it. But this release number, well, do you remember anything about the release numbers?
Yeah,
N568.
that was signed by the people back in the rear area when we get releases. N568. I mean, I wouldn't have been there in 68. It was just a control number, actually,
Now,
because
and
I was gone. I was gone by even 5th of 68. So this was just control numbers that they sent out to show that, we had submitted stories. That's how I remember it. Been a while, but
now
yeah.
with that as well, I mean, one of the things that we're looking at here too that I noticed is the typos here. It's X'd out through here, and so. But what caught my attention was this part here because I zoomed in and deciphered it of a large communist Chinese flag. Did somebody make you change that?
I, I think I changed it because I realized it wasn't Chinese. It was North Vietnamese. I thought it was just Chinese because I looked at the red part. But it soon I looked the more I looked at it through the lens of the artillery observer, I realized that no, it was NBA.
Well, and looking at this too, I mean, this is kind of a prideful spite of the Marines. You've got this NVA flag whipping back and forth across the DMZ, and
Yep.
some artillery gunners decided that they're going to have their way with it.
But we were on Christmas ceasefire. So you could do all the planning you wanted, but you couldn't fire around till the Christmas peace period was over.
And the ceasefire ended at 6 p.m. on Christmas Day, or was it the 26th?
Yeah, it was Christmas Day, the 26th. Yeah.
Now, speaking, it was Christmas Day. Did any of the Marines dress up like Santa Claus and bring around sea rats and
No,
mail?
no, there were a few of them that had little Christmas type stuff. Mostly you took whatever you could find locally in ordnance or used the ordnance plastic kind of stuff. There were some red things. People just basically, you know, there was no swag to put out. There was no berries to put out. It was just, Christmas. Sometimes what would be the most prevalent indication was guys would get letters from home on Christmas. And so sometimes they string them together on a piece of string and run them outside their bunker.
Well, and like you and I have talked, you've got to bring that morale in from home. You have to, some reminder in itself. You have to for some people.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is we got to have something from home. Home is home is what they call a touchstone of being able to get out of here and go back. If you couldn't remember home and if you don't have reinforcement of being home, you're a sad guy.
Well, and for you of being a new father and you haven't met your daughter, was that a hard Christmas?
Oh yeah. It was, but that was my third Christmas. I'd been in the Marines for 3 years by that time. So, the first year I didn't have a family. The second year I was at El Toro. The third year I was in Vietnam.
Well, and through that, thankfully, we do get this great story that did indeed make it. And I'll throw the publication up here in a minute. But um, what I liked about this is that this was, for a lot of the guys, the first time they had seen this flag, and it was just fluttering throughout the day.
Yep. And it just got everybody excited. There were people down there putting bets. There was a great deal of betting on which artillery round would get it first, and which ones would they blow the bridge. It was over the. I think I wrote in the story. The flag was flying over what was called Freedom Bridge. If you go back and look at the separation between North and South Vietnamese in 1967, you'll find that the Freedom Bridge was the area where they separated between those who wanted to go north and those who wanted to go south. Now, most of us didn't know that, but I did know it at the time later. Uh, so the whole issue was guys were betting on, all right, it's midnight on Christmas. What time do they let loose? 12:05, 12:06, 12:07. There were some, and of course everybody was up. Everybody was up on the perimeter, you know, waiting for the for the drums, waiting for the artillery to hit. And that's why it was amazing. After all the stuff we sent at them, they still took the flag down. I mean, they got out of there. They got out of there just before like 11:59 or 11:58 or 11:57. They DD'd out of DD is the term they used in South Vietnamese, which is run, DD, and Vic, the other one, which is come here. I used to get them confused, which confused the people I was talking to. But anyway, the end result was everybody bet money. We were waiting to see, and of course, somebody had to bring that flag down. We didn't hit it with artillery, but somebody had to bring it down. So it was a good story. People had several hours of fun just watching it and betting on what was going to take it out.
Well, and my favorite part of what made it into the Sea Tiger in this little snippet is the very end. Considering the barrage fired by the Kantian Marines, it's likely that the enemy color guard that lowered the flag isn't alive to raise it again.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, the Marines have a color guard. You run the flag up, you run the flag down. There's a protocol for all that. But in this particular case, I think they just tried to raise it down and ran for hell.
They knew that the game was up and it was time to get the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah. They knew the flag had irritated everybody long enough that they needed to leave town.
Now, did anybody, do you recall anybody winning the bet for how much money or whatever was at stake?
No, I just remember a group of they were forward observer FOs. I remember those guys on the ground talking about, all right, I'll bet $5 we can get them with a 350. I'll bet $5 we can get them with a 210. Yeah, well, we got to call it in first. Well, hopefully they'll be open.
And that's another one of the reasons of why I love Marines and Marine Corps humor.
Yeah, right. It's unusual.
It is. Now, how
It's built out of what you call dark humor, but it's still humor.
well, and that's definitely a staple for Marines is dark humor, and that's one of the things that you and I've talked about.
Yeah.
Now, how long did you end up spending time at Conti with Echo 21?
Well, I went into the barrel right after Thanksgiving, and I stayed in that barrel until January, where I went down to Da Nang and filed some stories. And then I came back up out of the barrel about the 20th of January. And that was in January. As I mentioned and told you in detail, during November, October, November, we had this series of sweeps that we did to try and keep the ground clear around Contiana. Of course, there was Medina, which was another issue. So I forget where you were going. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, Bernie. Well, what I was going to ask is that with the time you spent at Conti, the patrolling
Yeah.
at the fire base, did you participate in combat at that time, actively firing your weapon?
Yeah, there was a time when I tried to get a ride down from from Contien down to Dong Ha because I was trying to get back to file some stories. Come back, I wasn't leaving, and everybody knew I was coming back. And we had to take this road from Contien down to the road that went to Dong Ha, and it went down into the valley in which there had been numerous attempts with the squad size NVA trying to stop the trucks. Whatever trucks came, they fired on them. And I got into a small, what they call 6x6, and no, they called it was a small pickup. Yeah, God, names forget you now and then. It wasn't a 6x6, which is a truck. It was the other size, which had a little trailer on it. And I hooked up with the guys and said, "Look, are you headed down to Dong Ha? Can I catch a ride with you?" And they said, "Sure." So we got down about better part of a mile away from Contien, and we got ambushed. And we dumped the trailer. Trail was turned over. The vehicle was hit with one passenger that was wounded. And so we all deployed, got out of the vehicle, got out of the trailer as fast as we could, crawled in behind the berm of the road, and we had no radio, so you couldn't call for any help. And so we stayed there and emptied most of our magazines, and they were still incoming fire. And it just so happened at that time there was a mail truck coming back, and they had three guys with M16s on it, and they drove up and they could tell, and they put their vehicle between us and the sniper fire and the ambush fire, and we defeated them then. I suspect that maybe I had something to do with the demise of a couple because I emptied 4 magazines.
Well, and it brings me to the point, as a combat Marine, what's it like firing your weapon in combat, Bernie?
Uh, uh, it's all by route. You know that you know that you have a weapon, you know why you have a weapon, you know how the weapon works, and you're going to use it to the best of your ability. I don't know how else to describe it.
No, I mean, and well, that's that. I mean, it's your training takes over everything that's been ingrained in you.
Like when you're among dead and wounded, your training takes over.
Now, with that, you, if I'm not mistaken, spend this time at Conti and you finally make it down to Fubai, thinking that, it's towards the end of January, things are going to calm down. So what happens towards the end of January, Bernie?
Uh, how long have you got?
Bernie, I've got all day.
Well, as I said,
How long
my,
do you have?
huh?
How long do you have?
I have, okay, maybe we can do this again. Uh, I got to stretch back of my memory a little bit, but yeah, how I got the way is a story in a story, and I think I may have alluded to it in other times when we talked. But I ended up going into Way City. I came down to Dong Ha on the 30th. I came out of Contien, went to Dong Ha, showed my travel orders, got billeted on the first helicopter coming out on the 31st, which went to Fubai. And when I got to Fubai, I was tired and wore out. So I went to write my stories in that afternoon because we had a Fubai ISO attendance there. Gus Hasford, Earl Graham, Bob Bayer. They that was a Fubai X, what they called X-ray. Filed some stories, went back to 2-1 to the supply sergeant, a good friend of mine, and got some new utilities, new boots, got outfitted right because he was in supply. And I said, Roger, I just ripped the shit out of this, and this is all Contian green and yellow and everything. I said, how about a new set of utilities? He said, yeah, no problem. And so I slept the night down there in the 2-1 battalion supply area with Roger, good friend of mine. And we the next morning we wake up and there's this noise going through I was in the rear area with 2-1 at the time. It was 2-1's rear area. You always kept a rear area uh, away from where your combat zone is. So you had resupply and refinish and reprocessing people. And so anyway, I was woke up when there was a lot of noise going outside the tent. And I went to Roger and I said, what's going on? He said, there's some kind of problem up and so they're trying to put together a John Wayne reactionary company. And I said, where are they going? He said, they're going up to Way. And I thought, well, I'll go to Way, see my friend Tom. That this is just the John Wayne reactionary company is, a platoon or so of people that are sent in to, stop sniper fire. So I just said, well, I go out and I asked the first sergeant, I said, who's going out in the lead? And he said 2-1 or 2-5 rather, excuse me, 2-5. I said, where are they mounting up? He said, they're mounting up down there. He said, take all your gear, take all your ammunition gears you can. And 2-1 or 2-5's going up to Way City, so you might catch a ride. And I rode on a 6x. And when I got up to Way City, before we got into the city, they ambushed our convoy, which was 3 trucks.
Oh,
And
and you mentioned the John Wayne Reactionary Force, and I like that because in the research I've done, a lot of the guys from Golf Company 2-5 were very excited to go to Way because they'd been told that it was light contact, and they didn't even take their packs. They just took ammo and their
yeah,
rifles.
be back by nightfall.
And they were looking forward to, and I've read it in the book Fire in the Streets, but the statement was Golf Company was looking forward to a good horse, good food, and friendly people, not knowing that the NVA were running all over the place.
Well, that's because the rumor had been circulating since last February that, Way was an open city. You could go in there and take bus tours and see the provincial headquarters. I mean, so that's most of what the guys heard was, hey, it's an R&R place.
Well, and being as a veteran who was there, as a Marine who was there, it just makes me wonder why how the intel missed it, why the intel didn't talk about Alpha 1-1 getting chewed up outside of the city, how that was not relayed back to you guys at Fubai.
Well, mainly because nobody knew. The words from Alpha 1-1 that went in, the word from them was, we're taking minor sniper fire. Well, pretty soon, by the more they penetrated and crossed over the little road bridges into Way, they realized that they were trapped on their way to the MACV compound. They were trying to get to the MACV compound, and so it was a matter of, they had to. Uh, you lost me again.
Well, just about the lack of intel and communication from Alpha
I
1
mean,
to
I
5.
hate to bring it up, but let's face about the lack of intel in Israel for present moment.
Oh, it's a fact.
The same situation is here. Is remember it was Tet, the greatest of all celebrations in the Buddhist New Year, and all the people who are in the military and who are civilians. If you went to the South, you came up to the DMZ to be with your family. You for weeks, for a couple of weeks, you would watch traffic coming, everybody bringing their Christmas, their Tet, uh, their Tet stuff. They were all coming home. I remember capturing a South Vietnamese Air Force logistics guy in a way, and he surrendered himself because he said, "I want you to know who I am before you shoot me." And the issue was they were all on leave to go home. This guy was from Way. He was on leave to go home to Saigon. And he got caught in between leaving uh, leaving for Saigon because he was still in wait, trying to wait for his plane. And so these guys, there was a lot of traffic going back and forth between, they were bringing in weapons from 6 weeks before they actually rose up. They had weapons, they had maps, they had intel, they had all the stuff they needed. And the South Vietnamese were preparing for Tet. The NVA were not preparing for Tet. They were preparing for a war. They were preparing for an invasion. They were preparing for taking over and changing the whole war. If they could take Saigon and they could take Way, they could take the whole war. And so when you're sitting there and you're looking at this and you say, well, Intel failed. Well, Intel had been working in a vacuum. Don't forget that during the new year, we'd taken 3 days off from the new year, which was no bombing, no artillery, no nothing. And so they were able to move all their stuff back in. In that same time, they had all these buses and cars and carts with people coming home for coming to be with their family during Tet. And inside there were all the AK-47s, the B-40 rockets, and everything else, but nobody was checking. It was just holiday season. We could do the same thing here. You want to take us on? Take us on at Christmas time. You want to take us on at the 4th of July. We're not at our best in those times. So the Vietnamese, South Vietnamese were not their best because they were celebrating. They had been lulled into thinking that this was just, a ceasefire and everything would be fine.
Well, and strategically speaking, it's brilliant planning by the North Vietnamese and
Perfect.
expert execution.
And if you read the Battle for Way, you're going to find out from the planning phase of the North Vietnamese, it was a well tactically designed attack. No one can ever fault and say this was a ragtag effort. This was a well designed contact and fight and battle which had complete resources, logistics, supply, everything that they needed. It was well done. I mean, let's face it, that's why I still say I have great respect for an NBA person because they were in an army that was a real army. They were in a military operation. They were in a combat situation. They were a legitimate army of the North Vietnamese.
Well, and
And
in many ways too. I mean, the NVA planning, strategy, the preparation for it, and in many ways, this is the first urban conflict that the Marines have seen since Korea, outside of fighting in Seoul City.
There's a story somewhere now that you mention it, and you can do it. Check it with with Christmas. Uh, anyway, the story was that God, he'd shoot me if I knew I forgot. Uh, Christmas's CO.
Oh,
Uh,
Big Ernie Cheatham.
Big Ernie Cheatham. Yeah, Big Ernie. Big Ernie was the guy that said, I want everything and I want it now because he realized what was coming. And the bottom was, he realized early on that it was only going to be won by the Marines. It wasn't going to be won by the South Vietnamese because they were so discredited, not discredited, but they were so destroyed. Basically, they were destroyed. The only thing they had left was the first Darwin compound with the airfield up at the north, and it was a honest reactionary, and he took everything that he had, and the one thing that I remember him quoted as saying is that we've got everything we can get them, but it may not be enough. And so in the early days, there was no knowledge, particularly since we had been prohibited from any kind of artillery strikes, airplane strikes, bombing strikes, because this was the provincial headquarters, or not the provincial, this was the heartbeat of South Vietnamese.
Well, and in many ways, when I talk to my students about urban warfare in American military history,
That's where I wanted to go. Ernie Cheatham, one of his first radio calls back to Phu Bai, where he left behind his support group. He said, "Get me every book you can find on Marines in Incheon. Every book you can find up on urban fighting, you get to me." I'd never been trained to it. I mean, honest to God, we were rice paddies, mountains, and seashore. We were not. None of us were ever trained, really, to be uh, urban fighting. It just wasn't in our lexicon at that time.
well,
Because
and
the last time we fought was Korea.
well, and even before that, I mean, there was fighting on Saipan, at Garapan, the city of Garapan, but it wasn't a Marine Corps doctrine.
No, no, it was a different situation there. That was We're talking massive urban. Garapan was large; it had a big city, but it also was uh, a, once the biggest urban fighting that took place in the Southeast Asian conflict was not the Marines, but it was the Army in Philippines.
Manila.
Yeah, Manila. They had the biggest urban fight.
Well, and many historians equate that as the Stalingrad of the Pacific Theater. Brutal, honest, brutal, bloody fighting, utter destruction.
There's some credibility to that statement. There really is. When you start reading about how the Army was deployed and how the Army took massive casualties because the Japanese had plenty of time to abandon Luzon and the other city, but they had plenty of time to do it because MacArthur and the Army were still getting organized.
Well, and with that too, I mean, how many Marines in 1968 had experience from Korea and Incheon? Truth be told, where is the experience?
Very few. There were still. I remember serving at that time. There were a few Korean veterans, but I mean, their whole learning practice was done differently than what we were facing in Vietnam. I mean, urban fighting is urban fighting, but there's a difference when you were fighting in a less developed area, such as Incheon, which wasn't developed into a big city of a major. And then you go down and you take on Saigon, you take on Hue City. There's a bigger city, a bigger goal. So
Well,
I'm not faulting what they did in Korea in 1950 and 51 when they had the urban fighting. I'm just saying that it was a different situation with different weapons and army.
Well, and
And
that too, I draw a lot of parallels from Saigon and Hue City to Fallujah in 2004. Very, very
yes,
similar situations. And truth be told, I think you can honestly put them in the same ballpark of intensity, of the unknowingness. And even though the Marines were better prepared in 2004, how prepared can you really be for urban warfare?
well, and I respect greatly all the Fallujah battle, but the battle didn't take the lessons from Vietnam, because Vietnam was jungle, it was rice paddy, it was all these other things. It wasn't anything like dirt, sand, dust, sand dunes, wadis, those kinds. And if they had been training for it, which they really weren't in 2002, they weren't really training. They were still training in the Philippines for jungle warfare. I have a friend that was a lieutenant commander, a lieutenant colonel, who ran a training battalion in Luzon. He said they were still trying to train everybody on jungle rice paddies in that area. So when they shipped them over to Fallujah, and in that first couple of months of early battles, they didn't have the knowledge that had been acquired in how to take house to house that we had in Hue City. Yeah, it was different, but we still had to go house to house to house, yard to yard to yard, and they hadn't really trained that in Fallujah. They had been training for 6 years or before that for another jungle fight, and this wasn't a jungle fight. I think I'm confused, but that was my observation.
Well, and to get back to Way, I mean, you have all the mixed reports of its VC to where it's only a few companies of NVA to where eventually it's discovered that there's several thousand NVA
Two,
throughout.
regi- two regiments, 150 a regiment.
And then it's with that, on top of the things, the unpreparedness in many ways that you Marines were thrust into a situation and you had to adapt and overcome.
Yeah, because I think I've told this story before, or someone told it. When we got into Hue City, there was nobody had knowledge of how to fight building to building, room to room. And so the first thing we discovered was inside the fire teams and the squads, there were guys that had come from the inner city, and they knew how to get from one part of the building to another part of the building, and from one building to another building. And so they became the leaders. I remember one squad leader telling me, "Look, my squad and I have been in the rice paddies, we've been in the jungle, but now we're in the city." And he said, "I'm turning it all over to Corporal so and so, because he comes from Detroit. He knows what it's like to fight in the city." So that was an ace in a way.
Well, funnily enough, you might have watched the interview, but you weren't in this one. But it was with Captain Christmas, myself, and Charlie McMahon. And Charlie was a rifleman in Hotel 25, and that's what he mentioned is that the city kids were the ones that now brought the expertise into the fighting.
Exactly. Exactly. It was the city kids that knew how to get from block A to block B without everybody getting wiped out.
Well, and it's like in my reading of Fire in the Streets, I remember that it goes into detail that the first lesson was learned that you can't go through the front door because there's always a weapon pointed at the front door.
Yeah. Uh, you had to, in a way, it wasn't so much you had to worry about the front door, it was worrying about getting inside the walled compound of the house. Because all the houses had little wire, compounds bricked up, and in many cases they were bricked up with glass shards. So if you tried to go over it, you're going to get yourself cut badly. But yeah, the whole thing was, you can't back out uh, in house to house fighting. You've either got to hold it, or you're not in the jungle. You can just deploy your troops. You can deploy your machine gun. You can deploy your 60 Mike. You can deploy your first squad, your second squad. But the problem is when you get into house-to-house fighting, you don't have visual. You don't have the visual accessory. You can't see sometimes where your lead squad is and how did we get ahead of the line or are we behind the line? So that was a difficult time.
Well, and I think this will be a good way to lead into our next interview that we're gonna, of course, do sometime later this week, early next week at the bare minimum. But one of the things I've found interesting about the Marines in Way City is the effective use of equipment. Like you and I mentioned the trucks, but
Yeah.
also I've seen photographs of Marines carrying around Thompsons and M1 carbines from World War II and grease guns.
We took at the end of Loydai Street, we came upon the South Vietnamese armory. And that was when everybody got their M1s and they got their AK, their uh, uh, 45 cal grease guns because they had taken over the armory. They had already taken the armory, and that's how they funded all the prisoners that they forced to become combatants. But we found the armory, and it was stocked full of weapons. And so, I think I mentioned the other day, guys were carrying around 45s, they're carrying around M1s, M2s, they're carrying bars, and everybody's going, what the hell are you doing that? Don't shoot that shit. We don't know where it's coming from. So
Well,
everybody had a souvenir, but I'll tell you what, after about 3 or 4 days, they didn't have it anymore. It was too burdensome and it was too difficult to operate, and weren't accustomed to it. I mean, you get a 45 Thompson with 4 magazines. Good luck. Once the 4 magazines are gone, what are you going to do?
now, I'll ask you a couple more questions and we'll call it there for today. But going into Way City, being that you're going to be in an urban environment, did you start carrying a weapon outside of your 45 pistol?
I I carried a weapon. I got myself an M16 and a flak jacket when I got into MACV compound, and I realized that there was a huge pile of salvage gears, rifles, helmets, flak jackets, and that's where I went over and picked myself up a bandolier of M16 magazines, which had 8 of them, and I picked up an M14, cleared it, make sure it was good, and I put a helmet on.
And with that, I guess for you, that's when I guess reality sets in that this is going to be a totally different experience than you've had so far in country.
It's a whole brand new game. Never thought of it, never seen it. I've got to get close to the units that know what they're doing. I've got to stay out of my way, stay out of their way. And I'm trying to figure out, well, how do I write stories? Well, I write stories I take my notebooks out and I write what I observe, and with the idea that someday I'll get back and I can file the stories. I've got a couple notebooks full of stories from Way, but I have never been able to publish them because either the subjects were killed or wounded. So I learned by the time about third day in there with 2-1, there was no way I was going to be a reporter. I was going to be an attachment, which meant I had to carry what I can help carry, and I had to help with the wounded. That was what there was. There, I wasn't able to write stories. I wasn't able to take pictures at that time.
Well, that's just, I mean, so much going on in the city. It's urban. And to end our day today, I've got this map of Way City in itself. You've got Highway 1 here. So when Hotel 25 came into Way City along Duong Doi Tan Street here, where did you finally stop after coming into the city?
We stopped short about a block and a half short of the MACV compound.
The MACV compound's right over here, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we stopped right short, and then you had the Treasury building and the post office, which was in your own way. And so the roads came in. They took the roads to the MACV compound, and then started to fight our way out from there. And that was when 25 went to the post office and the Treasury, and they gave the first covering fire for 1-1, which had been held up for 2 days holding off that. And so then they started moving down Lulai Street, the hospital, government buildings, the college buildings, the nunnery, the school, Catholic school, down street.
Well, and on your way in, following Route 1 into the city, did you receive any fire as you guys were coming in on the trucks?
We took some fire as we got close to McVie compound. In fact, that was when the driver of the truck said, "You guys want to go on or you want to get out?" And I think most of us said we're getting out.
And yeah,
And then we hiked. It was a couple of blocks when we hiked into the McVie compound.
well, and compared to when you were there with your friend Steve Young, or excuse me, Tom Young, sorry. Um, I mean, the city was crowded always, lots of traffic, lots of people. And what
Well,
was
the south side was a commercial zone. That's where all the shops and the commencement buildings and everything were. It's where the college was, the hospital was, the provincial headquarters were. I mean, that was a commercial in enterprise right there. And that's the MacV, of course, where I went after I got in with 2.5 is I went down to the marina, the outlift, which is down right on the water, to see what they were doing for as far as evacuation was going. And that was the one place where they were evacuating wounded was alongside the canal or alongside the river.
Docklow Park, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes, that's correct.
Well, Bernie, I think that's a good
Yeah.
stopping point for today.
All right, we'll do another one.
So
I
get
toast you.
Bernie, cheers.
Cheers, my friend.
Cheers to you, sir. Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.